And I'll now call on Michael to present the medal.
Josh, it gives me great pleasure to give you this medal in honour of my great-grandfather and you as being the 15th recipient of this very medal. Thank you.
Josh, I now call on you to respond. Thank you.
Vice President Mary, Michael Bennett, Stephen Lake, Peter Davis, previous award winners, Michael Hedbury, and others, distinguished guests, Chris and others who are in the room. It's very nice to be invited here with my wife, particularly after I was retired by popular demand at the last election. The first thing I'd like to say is thank you to Rotary Melbourne to be here at the first and the largest Rotary Club out of the more than 1,000 across our country is very special. From its beginnings back in 1905 with Paul Harris in Chicago, more than $4 billion has been distributed by the Rotary Foundation in the years thereafter. And your work promoting better outcomes for our community across health, education, the environment, and peace in the world is greatly appreciated. I noticed the Peace Park next to the Botanical Gardens here, which Paul Harris himself visited on his only visit to Australia back in 1935. It is very much about service above self. And for that, I know I speak on behalf of all Australians, thank you for what you have done and continue to do. One of my favourite political leaders is Winston Churchill. And he famously said, you make a living from what you get, but you make a life from what you give. And so to be here at this club with its association to Sir John Monash and the history of giving, I am very grateful. To receive the Sir John Monash Medal is very much a great honour, but also at a personal level, particularly special for me. Not just because I admire Sir John Monash's feats in war, but equally his contributions in peace. And Sir John Monash and his values signify the very best of Australia. Service above self, sacrifice, loyalty, leadership in every aspect of his life and in every sense of that word. So in my remarks today, I thought it important to tell a bit of that story of Sir John Monash, as well as talking about how his values and his qualities are as relevant today as they have ever been over the last 100 years. Born on the 27th of June, 1865, the only son and the eldest of 3 children, Sir John Monash was both a prodigy and a polymath. The Ducks of Scotch College, a member of the Melbourne Hebrew Congregation Choir, a talented pianist whose specialty was Chopin. He was also described by his biographer, Geoffrey Searle, as being a good runner, an average horseman, and a fair shot. But in his life, he also spent some time in Jerilderie, because his father opened a store in that New South Wales town. And in my favourite book on Sir John Monash, Roland Perry writes, the book is titled The Outsider Who Won the War. In that book, he recounts the story which Michael and I were just talking about, where famously Ned Kelly rode with his gang into Jerilderie and stopped outside the Monash family store. And a young Monash, we think 12 at the time, was asked by Ned Kelly to mind the horses. And for that was given a shilling. And Perry says that Monash had said, of all the great achievements of his life, that was the biggest thrill of his life. And Monash achieved a lot before the war, for which, of course, he made his name. He was an engineer. He founded Monash Concrete. He was part of the constructions of some of the great buildings of this city, including Anderson Bridge. And he was known as an expert witness, particularly in patent cases. And Leo Custon is arguably the most distinguished Supreme Court judge this state had produced, had famously said, any solicitor in Victoria that does not retain Sir John Monash as an expert witness is guilty of willful negligence. But of course, Monash made his name and his most brilliant contribution in the war to end all wars. He did not make his way up the officer corps. He joined the Rifles Regiment when he was a student at Melbourne University. He was then within the ranks of the North Melbourne Battery. And when the First World War hit, he played the role of Australia's chief censor for the first 4 weeks, before he went to Gallipoli, where he landed on the 26th of April, 1915. Now, it was a disastrous campaign, for which we are all familiar. But Monash was known then and thereafter for something which was not commonplace among military leaders of his rank. He was respected by his soldiers as somebody who did not see them as cannon fodder to go over enemy lines. And that reputation is something that stuck with Monash for the rest of his career, both in uniform and thereafter. He then went to France and the European battlefields. And one of the most famous battles happened on the 4th of July, 1918, the Battle of Hamel, which is the first time Australian and American troops had gone into battle together. Before that battle, General Pershing had wanted to withdraw his American troops. But Monash gave him the confidence that under his leadership, the job could be done. The Battle of Hamel was over in 93 minutes, and it's been seen by historians around the world as the first and most powerful illustration of modern warfare. For Monash brought his engineering, his mathematical understanding to the battlefield, to command simultaneously infantry, artillery, tanks, and the Air Force. Monash was a great student of military history. His pamphlet, The 100 Hints for Military Commanders, became essential reading. And in that battle of Hamel, he made his name. But the most significant battle of the First World War was one again that Monash played a central commanding role. It was the Battle of Amiens. The Battle of Amiens saw Monash command more than 200,000 troops. And the Battle of Amiens was described by General Ludendorff of the German armies as the blackest day for Germany in the history of World War I. And then after that war, just the day after that war, on the 12th of August, 1918, King George V went to Bertangles, France, and knighted Sir John Monash on the battlefield, the first general to be knighted on the battlefield by a reigning monarch in more than 200 years. And Tim Fisher, a recipient of this award, and someone who wrote a wonderful book called Maestro John Monash, which I launched, said that if at the end of the war, Monash had been a general, it was very likely that King George V would have promoted him to Field Marshal, as he did with Allenby, Plumer, Wilson, and the French commander Ferdinand Foch. But it wasn't to be. So Monash played a central role, in fact, arguably the leading role, with the Canadian General Currie in helping good triumph over evil. And these were dark times for our great country. Of a population of less than 5 million at the time, more than 420,000 Australians had enlisted. More than 100,000 Australians had been wounded, and 61,000 Australians had lost their life. There wasn't a city, there wasn't a country town, there wasn't a home in this country that hadn't been touched and devastated by the tragedy of the First World War. But Monash's work was not done. He oversaw the repatriation to Australia from London of 160,000 Australian personnel. And he played a leading role in the AIF's education program thereafter, again priding himself on the welfare of his troops. And we know that his contribution here in Australia only grew after coming back from military service. He became the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Melbourne. He became the President of the Academy of Sciences. He became the President here at Rotary. He founded the Zionist Federation of Australia. He was behind the Shrine of Remembrance, and he led the Anzac Day marches. This was a man whose contribution to community in peacetime was arguably like none other before him and none other since. And it was those values of leadership, service, and integrity which characterized Sir John Monash's life. And of course, he became also the manager of the State Electricity Commission of this state. And I was talking to Michael about a great speech I came across from 1865 by Sir Robert Menzies. Outside the statue of Monash on Linlithgow Avenue. And in this speech, Menzies describes Monash as the greatest orator and advocate he had ever heard. Think about that. Menzies was a pallbearer for Winston Churchill, who wasn't a bad advocate. And he said Monash was the greatest. And he recounts the story how before he entered federal politics, Menzies was Deputy Premier of the state. And he was sitting in the cabinet room after the cabinet had rejected unanimously a request for £1 million for the State Electricity Commission of Victoria that Monash had had. And the door was knocked. And outside the door was Sir John Monash wanting to see the cabinet. And Menzies recalled how when Monash entered the room, everyone stood to attention. And normally outsiders would sit 2 rows back and address the cabinet, yet Menzies sat at the cabinet table. And Menzies opened up the conversation by saying, I have heard that this cabinet has rejected my request for additional funding for the State Electricity Commission of Victoria. That must be, Monash said, because you don't understand the proposal. Monash quickly laid out his proposal, stood up and said to the Premier McPherson, do I have the support of the Cabinet? And McPherson, without hesitation, said, yes, of course you do, Sir John Monash. Menzies said it was the only time he'd ever seen a Cabinet reverse a unanimous decision with haste. And so there it is. Monash's life before, during, and after the war. A life that was celebrated by nearly 300,000 Melburnians upon his death in 1931, who lined the streets, nearly 300,000 Melburnians out of a then population of just under 1 million. That is the best evidence of a life that has been fully lived. And today, we should all not just pay homage to Monash's life, but remember what drove him to success. And I believe that for the first time in arguably 75 years since the end of the Second World War, our world is on the brink of more conflict. It wouldn't be customary for a former Liberal treasurer to quote Vladimir Lenin. But Lenin famously said about foreign affairs, he said, sometimes in decades, nothing happens, and sometimes in weeks, decades happen. And ladies and gentlemen, this is where I think we are today. Because during the Cold War, we had 2 power blocks, the Soviet Union and their satellites, and the United States and their allies. And security, despite the Bay of Pigs and despite the Vietnam War, was guaranteed in the world by the principle of mutually assured destruction. This time round, power is a lot more diffuse. And we have hotspots on the Korean Peninsula. We have hotspots in the Middle East. We have a hotspot between China and Taiwan. And of course, we have a bloody conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In just the last 24 months, we have seen a seismic shift in the psyche of Europe. Finland and Sweden, forever on the sidelines of NATO, have put their hands up for membership. Germany, a pacifist country after the Second World War, is announced $100 billion extra spending on defence. And Europe, which relied on Russian gas and oil for 40% of its energy needs, has turned the tap off overnight. And as we walk out of this room today, or we turn on our television tomorrow, we very well could see an escalation between Israel and Iran that could bring in other actors, particularly the United States. These are very uncertain times, including here in our own countries or on the streets of London or on the streets of Washington and New York, where protesters are using our democratic freedoms that we give them to undermine democracy as we know it, chanting slogans they don't understand and inciting violence that we do not need. And so I personally draw on the inspiration of Sir John Monash at this time, because he was no warmonger. But he knew you needed strength to secure the peace. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what Australia needs today. This is what our allies and our fellow democracies need today. We have to have zero tolerance for the rise of authoritarian regimes around the world, and we have to have zero tolerance for anti-democratic forces here at home. So I am enormously honoured to receive this Monash Medal. I'm honoured as a proud Australian. I'm honoured as a graduate of Monash University. I'm honoured as a student of history who knows in order to know where we are going, we have to know where we come from. And I'm also honoured as a proud Australian Jew who knows that through Monash's leadership, anti-Semitism in polite circles became a no-no because of his great example to us all. Thank you for this honour. I, for one, will continue to promote the values of Rotary and continue to promote the knowledge, the understanding, the history, and the values of Sir John Monash. Thank you very much.
Please, everybody, take your seats. And I've got to ask Joe to come up with the magic parcel, which has disappeared during the break. The Honourable Josh Frydenberg, on behalf of the Rotary Club of Melbourne, the Spirit of Australia Foundation guests who are with us, past medal winners of the Monash Medal, we thank you for your wonderful, wonderful speech today.
Thank you, Mr.
Now,
This is a first, by the way.
we have a tradition in this club of supporting Australian made. And one of our members, Phil Endersby, with Wilderness Wear, still makes socks in Australia. So it is with great humility that I present you with an Australian made product, which is very rare these days.
Thank you very much.
In closing the meeting today, I would like to thank our visitors and guests for attending. I'd also like to thank Rosemary Nixon and Tony Bettini for supporting us during the meeting, and our lunch setup and reception teams for their weekly effort in making this meeting happen. Please, if any members could stay back and assist, they would be very welcome to help the team pack up, and it would be greatly appreciated. 2 reminders. Next week, we meet here at number 35, and our guest speaker will be Paul Guerra, Chief Executive, Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Paul will be speaking on embracing growth, Victoria's path to prosperity in 2024. A second notice. Tomorrow morning, I invite you to rise early and join us at the Shrine of Remembrance in the sanctuary for a service to remember the Battle of Amiens on the 8th of August, 1918. It's something this club has been involved in since 2010. I know it's a little bit chilly, but we would like to see you there if possible.